Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We are continuing with the tales and parables told by Sri Ramakrishna. And before I forget, I'll remind you that next week is Shivaratri, so we will not be meeting. But you're welcome to tune in to Shivaratri. In fact, it would be wonderful if you would tune in to Shivaratri. So we're kind of playing leapfrog over the weeks. We skipped last week, and we're now here this week, but now we have to skip next week. All right, so is that better? So we're going to start with the parable called Beware of the Touch of the Worldlings. So, sounds like one of those mystical worlds from a modern fairy tale or something. Okay.
With regard to the priestly class, Sri Ramakrishna used to tell an incident from the life of Gauranga. When Sri Gauranga, being wholly absorbed in Bhava Samadhi, fell into the ocean, he was hauled up in a net by fishermen. But as they came into contact with the sacred person through the net, they too were thrown into a trance. Abandoning all their work, they roamed about like maniacs, simply chanting the sacred name of Hari. Their relatives could not cure the malady by any means. Finding no other remedy, they came at last to Sri Gauranga, told him about their sorrow. Sri Gauranga then said to them, "Get some rice from a priest's house, put it into their mouth, you will see them cured." So they did accordingly, and the fishermen lost their blissful ecstasy. Such is the contaminating influence of worldliness and impurity on spiritual growth.
I'm assuming this is implying that the priestly group would tend to be more involved in selling their pujas, basically, selling their rites and rituals for various worldly gains. And so they have a worldly contamination to them. All right, so let's go on with the next one.
Don't measure spiritual values by secular standards. Once a sage was lying by the roadside, deeply immersed in samadhi. A thief, while passing by that way, saw him and thought, this fellow here must be a thief. He must have broken into some houses last night. He's now sleeping through exhaustion. Police will be very soon here to catch him, so let me escape in time. Thus, cogitating, he ran away. Soon after, a drunkard came. Seeing the sage, said, you've fallen into the ditch by drinking too much. I'm steadier than yourself and am not going to tumble down. Last of all, became a sage. And realizing that a great saint was lying in the state of samadhi, he sat down by his side, began to stroke his holy feet gently. Thus our worldly tendencies prevent us from recognizing true holiness and piety.
Yeah, and this of course is sort of you could generalize this to all sorts of things where we tend to judge things by our own standards and not by others. This is where appreciation of cultural differences is important. You have to realize this tendency in order to overcome our natural tendencies not to appreciate what other people are doing and what other cultures are doing. And so it has broader teachings here than just the one about the seeing a holy person and judging them by the worldly standards. And of course, you can't expect a holy sage to be a great businessman or businesswoman or making a lot of money. So that kind of thing. But this is, again, there are all sorts of things in life where we have to be careful not to judge people by our standards as opposed to their standards. So if you visit a different country and they have a different culture and their practices are different, you have to recognize that these are the ways they do things in their culture. And they might seem peculiar, or you might interpret them as being something awful, but it's not awful in their context. It's perfectly normal and natural. And so in order to not develop a lot of prejudices and hatreds and so forth, we need to keep this teaching in mind. All right, so let's read about be watchful. This whole section is called imperatives, so we're getting some good parables here.
One should be extremely watchful. Even clothes create vanity. I noticed that even a man suffering from an enlarged spleen sings nude widows light songs when he is dressed out in black bordered cloth. There are men who spout English whenever they put on high boots. And when an unfit person puts on an ochre cloth, he becomes vain. The slightest sign of indifference to him arouses his anger and pique.
Yeah, we have to be careful not to, being a Swami myself, I realize you have to be careful not to take great pride in your being a Swami. That's not what being a Swami is all about. It's not about becoming vain. And this, again, can be generalized to all sorts of situations where just because one person dresses in a different way than you do, or you want to dress in a different way than somebody else, doesn't mean you're particularly better or they're particularly better. And so again, we have to be watchful not to judge people simply by externals. And that goes for ourselves. We have to make sure that our externals match our internals. All right. So let's see, we're going to skip over to sync now and then.
The farther you advance, the more you will see that there are other things even beyond the sandalwood forest. Mines of silver, gold, and precious gems. Therefore, go forward. But how can I ask people to go forward? If worldly people go too far, then the bottom will drop out of their world. One day, Keshav was conducting a religious service. He said, "Oh God, may we all sink and disappear in the river of bhakti." When the worship was over, I said to him, "Well, look here. How can you disappear altogether in the river of bhakti? If you do, what will happen to those seated behind the screen? But do one thing. Sink now and then, and come back again to dry land."
All right, there are a few footnotes here. Of course, this is referring to the parable that we read a couple of weeks ago about go forward, how someone was given advice to go forward into the forest, and he kept finding precious things, first the sandalwood forest and then the silver mine, and then the gold mine, and then precious gems. And that was the teaching about how spiritual life doesn't end with the first spiritual experience, with a feeling of a little bliss, or perhaps a vision, or something of that nature, that it goes much deeper than that. Then Keshav, of course, was the celebrated Brahma leader that Sri Ramakrishna would see on many occasions. So he was the one conducting this religious service, and then the women, the people behind the screen, refers to women. Women would be seated behind a screen during some of these scenes. I guess there was sort of a separation of the genders in these Brahmo meetings. So anyway, the teaching is that rather than being immersed in samadhi all the time, which of course is impossible, your body will drop off eventually, but you can have spiritual experiences, and he's talking about the river of bhakti here. That would be feelings of great joy and bliss of communion with God. He's saying that, take the dip in the river now and then, but you have to come back and continue your worldly duties. You can't just shirk your worldly duties. If you're in married life, which apparently most of these people were, then you can't just decide that you're going to desert your family and your children. So you have to continue to fulfill your dharmic duties in society. And so this is what this particular parable is referring to. And it's really an incident in Sri Ramakrishna's life more than a parable, as we mentioned several times. Several of these are recounting little teachings of Sri Ramakrishna that were in the context of his actual life. All right, so we continue, we go forward to keep a part of the ridge open.
Women and gold alone is the world. Many people regard money as their very lifeblood. However much you may show love for money, one day perhaps every bit of it will slip from your hand. In our part of the country, the farmers make ridges around their paddy fields. You know what these ridges are? Some farmers make ridges with great care all the way around their fields. Such ridges are destroyed by the rush of rainwater. But some farmers leave a part of the ridge open and put sod there. The water flows through the sod, leaving the field covered with silt after the rain. And then they reap a rich harvest. They alone make good use of money who spend it for the worship of God or the service of holy men and devotees. Their money bears fruit.
Yeah, it's kind of a pay-it-forward philosophy that Sri Ramakrishna is advocating here. And this is what Swami Vivekananda recommended to Mr. Rockefeller, which prompted him to start the Rockefeller Foundation, that if you make a lot of money, don't just sit on it, do something useful with it. So this is part of what the teaching is. Also, if you're too greedy, it actually might be detrimental, because as these farmers found, if they had ridges all the way around, then with the rush of rainwater, they could be washed out, because the water had no place to go but to wash out the ridges. But if you left a little bit of a weak place there where it could sort of filter through, then you actually get nice fertile silt deposited on your field. And so that's the indication there, is just as the water needs to run through you in order to enrich your field, your wealth needs to run through you as well, not just stagnate and do nothing. And of course, you can, if you put it under the mattress in 30 years, it will be worth about half of what it was when you put it there. If you stick it in the stock market, depending on where you put it, you could make a lot of money or you could lose it all. So you have to be smart about the way you use your wealth and do it not just for your good, but hopefully in the pursuit of the best for the society at large. So we should do that with all our good things. We should, every good things we have, we should make sure that they get shared with others. Count not on the unknown future.
Once in the month of June, the kid was playing near its mother, and with a merry frisk, they told her that it intended to make a good feast of Ross flowers. This is a species of flowers budding abundantly during the festival of Rasalia in November. Well, my darling, replied the dame, it's not such an easy thing as you seem to think. We'll have to pass through many a danger before you can hope to feast on Rasa flowers. The ensuing months of September and October are not very auspicious for you, for someone may take you to be sacrificed to the goddess Durga. Then there's the terrible time of Kali Puja. If you're fortunate enough to survive that period, also there is still the Jagadhatri Puja, when almost all that remains of the male members of our species are sacrificed. But if your good luck carries you safely through all these crises, then you can hope to make a feast of Ras flowers in the beginning of November. Like the dame in the fable, we should not hastily approve of all the aspirations which our youthful fancies may entertain, considering the manifold crises which we may have to pass through in our lives.
Well, of course, we all face this. Most people make plans. You know, they go to school and they get an education, and then they have plans about what they want to do with that education, and the kind of job they want to get, where they want to live, and they've got this ideal spouse in their head that they're going to find somehow. And and then they've got aspirations for their kids. They're sure their kids are going to be wonderful and they're going to grow up to be specific things. Somehow they think their kids are going to want to do what they want them to do. So what you're doing is setting yourself up for disappointments. So, you know, I know one person that used to say, I like to be a pessimist, that way I'm never disappointed. That's not usually the advice we give people. It's nice to be optimistic, but not so optimistic that you get your heart set on exactly what you want. You may have to be flexible, and you may have to change your plans. Certainly in these days, people might prepare for a job, and in 10 or 15 years, they find that that job doesn't exist anymore. It's some kind of technology has pretty much wiped it out. So you can't get too attached to your ideas about what the future is going to hold, or you're going to end up disappointed. So I remember there's somebody that was trying to get a degree in library science, and because of a proposition in California, they weren't able to do that, and they just kind of gave up. It was just, rather than making other plans and doing something else, which would have been the sensible thing to do. So this is the way we have to try to keep a positive attitude, but don't get your heart set on things. And certainly, as a gardener, you might even get disappointed as to when the flowers bloom. You know, you could end up with a huge rainstorm a few days before, and that kind of make all the flowers not very appealing. They're damaged in the wind and the rain. And so you can't really predict that. I always marvel at how the florists do it. Of course, they've got controlled greenhouses. They have to control everything in the environment in order to get the flowers all to bloom at the right time. They have to get them all to bloom for St. Patrick's Day and Mother's Day and Valentine's Day and all these different holidays. They have to make sure the right kind of flowers are blooming at the right time. And in order to do that, you've got to control everything in your environment. Well, we can't control everything in our environments. We're not living in greenhouses. So we have to make sure that we're flexible and that we can alter our aspirations and our plans and think about how if one door closes, another one will open. And many times that's the case. Sometimes people have some difficulty in life and it seems like, gee whiz, I've been planning this all my life and now this is not happening. But they're forced to go into something else and they discover they like it even better. So you can't think that just because your original plans are thwarted in some way that you might not end up with something even more interesting in life. So it's an interesting parable. Don't count on the unknown future. That's certainly the case. Who would have guessed that we would have had a pandemic that would still be going on back in 2019? So you just never know. All right, so let's talk about discriminate even in giving in charity.
Once a butcher was taking a cow to a distant slaughterhouse. Being ill-treated by the butcher, the cow got unruly on the way, and the man found it very difficult to drive her. For several hours, he reached a village at noon. Being thoroughly exhausted, he went to an almshouse nearby and partook of the food that was freely distributed there. Feeling himself quite refreshed after a full meal, the butcher was about to lead the cow easily to the destination. Now, a part of the sin of killing the cow fell to the donor of the food distributed to the almshouse. So even in giving food and alms in charity, one should discriminate and see that the recipient is not a vicious and sinning person likely to use the gift for evil purposes.
Yes, that's not always easy to determine. And I think that in other places I've seen advice where you have to give with detachment. You can't try to see what happens to the person and judge, well, they didn't use that right, so I shouldn't have given it. To a certain extent, you have to be a bit detached if you're going to be unselfish. But certainly if you have any inkling that it might be used in the wrong way, then it would be very good to be discriminating and not to be giving to that person that's not going to be using it in the right way. All right. Hiss you may, but bite you shall not.
Some cowherd boys used to tend their cows in a meadow where a terrible, poisonous snake lived. Everyone was on the alert for fear of it. One day a brahmachari was going along the meadow. The boys ran to him and said, "Oh, revered sir, please don't go that way. A venomous snake lives over there." "What of it, my good children?" said the brahmachari. "I'm not afraid of the snake. I know some mantras." So saying, he continued on his way along the meadow. The cowherd boys, being afraid, did not accompany him. But in the meantime, the snake moved swiftly towards him with upraised hood. But as soon as it came near, he recited a mantra, and the snake lay at his feet like an earthworm. The brahmachari said, "Look here, how do you go about doing harm? Now come,
I will give you a holy word. By repeating it, you will learn to love God. And ultimately, you will realize Him. And also get rid of your violent nature. With saying this, he taught the snake a holy word. And he initiated the snake into spiritual life. The snake bowed before the teacher and said, "O revered sir, how shall I practice spiritual discipline?" "Repeat that sacred word," said the teacher, "and do no harm to anybody." As he was about to depart, the brahmachari said, "I shall see you again." Now some days passed. The cowherd boys noticed the snake would not bite, so they threw stones at it. And still, it showed no anger. It behaved as if it were an earthworm. One day, one of the boys came close to it, caught it by the tail, and whirling it round and round, dashed it again and again on the ground, and threw the snake away. The snake vomited blood and became unconscious. It was stunned. It could not move. Oh, so thinking it dead, the boys went their way. Late at night, the snake regained consciousness, and slowly, with great difficulty, it dragged itself into its hole. Its bones were broken, and it could scarcely move. Many days passed. The snake became a mere skeleton, covered with skin. Now and then at night, it would come out and search for food. But for fear of the boys, it would not leave its hole during the daytime. Since receiving the sacred word from the teacher, it had given up doing harm to others, and it maintained its life on dirt, leaves, or the fruit that dropped from trees. Now, about a year later, the brahmachari came that way again, and he asked about the snake. The cowherd boys told him it's dead. He couldn't believe them. He knew that the snake would not die before attaining the fruit of the holy word with which it had been initiated. He found his way to the place, and searching here and there, he called the snake by the name he had given it. Hearing the guru's voice, the snake came out of its hole and bowed before him with great reverence. "How are you?" asked the brahmachari. "I'm well, sir," replied the snake. The teacher asked, "Why are you so thin?" The snake replied, "Revered sir, you ordered me not to harm anybody, so I've been living only on leaves and fruit. Perhaps that has made me thinner." The snake had developed the quality of sattva. It could not be angry with anyone, and it had totally forgotten that the cowherd boys had almost killed it. The brahmachari said, "Well, it can't be mere want of food that has reduced you to this state. There must be some other reason. Now think a little." And then the snake remembered the boys had dashed it against the ground. And it said, "Well, yes, revered sir. Now I remember. The boys one day dashed me violently against the ground, but they're ignorant after all. They didn't realize what a great change had come over my mind. How could they know I wouldn't bite or harm anyone?" And the brahmachari exclaimed, "Oh, what a shame. You're such a fool. You don't know how to protect yourself. I asked you not to bite. But I didn't forbid you to hiss. Now, why didn't you scare them away by hissing? So you must hiss at wicked people. You must frighten them lest they should do you harm, but never inject your venom into them. One must not injure others.
Yeah, that's a famous parable that Sri Ramakrishna used to tell many times. And of course, if you take it too literally, there's a few problems with it, like the snake did have to eat and things like that. But anyway, the main point of the story is that you don't have to be so violent right at the beginning. You can just simply warn people to keep their distance or to stay away or to behave or whatever the situation happens to be. Violence isn't your first option. It should be your last option. And so you have to take all other possible measures in order to maintain order, discipline, and protect yourself. So, but anyway, that was a long rendition of that story. It's usually a little shorter, but someone has elaborated it to great extent. All right, if you must serve, serve but one master.
Serve him who you are already serving. The mind becomes soiled by serving but one master. And to serve 5 masters? Once a woman became attached to a Muslim and invited him to her room. But he was a righteous person. He said to her that he wanted to use the toilet and must go home to get his water jar for water. The woman offered him her own, but he said, "No, that will not do. I shall use the jar to which I have already exposed myself. I cannot expose myself before a new one." And with these words, he went away. That brought the woman to her senses. She understood that a new water jar, in her case, signified a paramour.
This is culturally sort of out of the realm of our normal thoughts here, so I'm not even sure what to say about this one. I'm not quite sure how it fits the title about serving a master. But anyway, all right, let's go on to first cleanse the pure, then preach and cure.
There lived in a village a young man named Padmalacham. People used to call him Podo for short. In this village, there was a temple in a very dilapidated condition. It contained no image of God. Aswata and other plants sprang up on the ruins of its walls. Bats lived inside. And the floor was covered with dust and the droppings of the bats. The people of the village had stopped visiting the temple. One day, after dusk, the villagers heard the sound of a conch shell from the direction of the temple. They thought perhaps someone had installed an image in the shrine and was performing the evening worship. One of them softly opened the door and saw Padmalochan standing in a corner blowing the conch. No image had been set up. The temple hadn't been swept or washed. Filth and dirt lay everywhere. Then he shouted to Podo, "You've set no image here within this shrine, O fool. Blowing the conch, you simply make confusion worse confounded." Day and night, 11 bats screamed there incessantly. There's no use making a noise if you want to establish the deity in the shrine of your heart. If you want to realize God, first of all, purify the mind. In the pure heart, God takes a seat. One cannot bring the holy image into the temple if the droppings of bats are all around. The 11 bats are our 11 organs, 5 of action, 5 of perception, and the mind. First of all, invoke the deity, then give lectures to your heart's content. First of all, dive deep, plunge to the bottom and gather up the gems. Then you may do other things.
Yeah, so the image here is of a temple that's not clean, and then the analogy is that we ourselves need to be clean. We need to have a clean interior, a clean mind, a clean heart. And with a clean mind and a heart, then you don't need an external image. All you need to do is install the deity in your heart, and you can worship the deity in your heart in your own way. The sound does not need to be external. It can be internal. So this person was doing everything kind of backward. There was no deity installed at all. The place was filthy, and he was making a lot of external noise. So it was just all just sort of going through the motions without having anything really prepared or set up. There was no preparation for this spiritual practice here. He hadn't cleaned the place, he hadn't installed a deity. He was just running through the motions of a spiritual practice. Well, that's not the way to do it. You have to, as it says at the end, invoke the deity, and then you can continue after that. All right, we're almost finished with this section. We have one small tale here at the end. It's either I ad infinitum or none of it.
Shankaracharya had a certain disciple who served him long without receiving any teaching. One day, hearing footsteps behind him, he asked, "Who's there?" Was answered by this disciple, "It is I." Then said the master, "If this I is so dear to thee, either stretch it to the infinite or renounce it altogether."
So that's that familiar saying that Sri Ramakrishna expanded his ego to infinity, and Nag Mahashai made it so small that it could slip through the net of Maya. So this is basically saying the same thing. You either have to expand your I-ness to include everyone, so that everyone is one with you, and you are completely universal, or you have to be extremely humble and not think of yourself at all, and in that sense becoming unselfish. Both really end up at the same place. You're thinking of others more than just the puny little individual I. And so this is the teaching there. We just have a few minutes, maybe we're starting a new section, so I'll just make a few comments about Shiva and Shivaratri. Of course, if you've been around here for any length of time, you've read a bit about Sri Ramakrishna and how he was the priest at the Kali temple. But we mustn't forget that the Kali temple also had 12 Shiva lingams installed. That's probably representative of the 12 special places of Shiva worship throughout India. And so this was part of his sadhana, and if you read the gospel, he frequently mentions Shiva, and he mentions him oftentimes in the context of cosmic consciousness or universal consciousness, not so much as a personified deity, but as cosmic consciousness, which is really the symbol of the Shiva lingam. That's the most abstract symbol we can think of for worshiping the divine. And of course, there's a parable behind that too. There's a parable behind everything, it seems. But you just have to remember the parables are just there to illustrate principles. So the Brahma and Vishnu were arguing about who was greater. Each thought they were the greatest of the deities. And then this huge pillar of light appeared, and this voice came forward and said, to solve your problem, see who can figure out where the end of this light is. And Brahma couldn't find it, but he decided to fake it. And he brought a beautiful flower back and said, oh, this is what I found at the end of the pillar. But Vishnu was honest and said, I couldn't find it anywhere. Because of that, that's why Brahma, you don't see a lot of temples to Brahma. Brahma is not worshipped because he was egotistical. But that pillar was representative of the Shiva as the absolute column of light, the light of the world. And so this pillar of light is what the Shiva lingam represents. And of course, it's always pictured in a yoni. So you have those two universal symbols, the universal symbol of a straight rod and a circle. The circle represents the feminine, and the rod represents the masculine, and the emergence of creation is the result of the union of those two. So if you took a rod and dropped it straight down into a pool of water, you would get ripples of circles. And so this is the image of the joining of the masculine and feminine. If you don't do this, all you have is a flat surface. But if the rod falls into the water, then you have something happening. So similarly, when you have the combination of the two great principles, the masculine and feminine, then the world is created. And so they're one. They're not really two, as Sri Ramakrishna would mention over and over again. You can't have one without the other. And so if you read Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy, you find that it is, you can't pigeonhole it into any one philosophy. Of course, he had two prominent teachers. He had one who, the Bhairavi Brahmani, was a tantric teacher, which is a Shakta philosophy, a philosophy that worships the Divine Mother as the ultimate symbol of the universe. And then he had Todupuri, who was a Advaitic monk, who taught him about the absolute Brahman, the absolute without qualities, and realizing Nirvikalpa Samadhi in that tradition. But with these two traditions, you find that he's very universal. He's not stuck in just one of them. And he also ends up really with a philosophy that's very reminiscent of some of the Shaivite traditions. Shaivite traditions are those that see Shiva as the ultimate principle for reality. And again, these are just convenient conventions for thinking of the ultimate reality. It doesn't necessarily, obviously, it doesn't limit the ultimate reality. Our ways of thinking about the ultimate reality don't affect the ultimate reality. It's just our way of trying to wrap our mind around it. So you can try to wrap your mind around it thinking of Shiva as the ultimate reality, or as the Divine Mother being the ultimate reality. But as Sri Ramakrishna would point out over and over again, they're really one and the same anyway. It's not that they're two separate principles, but we see them as two from our particular standpoint here as embodied beings. So the other important thing to remember here is that both the Shakta philosophy and the Shaivite philosophy emphasize that unlike the Shankara Advaitic philosophy that emphasizes the that Brahman alone is real and all else is illusory. The other philosophies, Shakta and Shaivite, take the position that Brahman alone is real and everything is Brahman. And so even though we don't see it that way, there is divinity infused in everything. And Sri Ramakrishna's experiences verified this. He saw everything infused with consciousness. So he couldn't say it was unreal in the ultimate sense because there was consciousness in it. That was an important point. Then the last important connection is that from the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda made his motto that that we should serve God, Shiva, in forms of jivas. The jivas, the individual souls, mankind, humankind, can be served as Shiva. So take the attitude that Shiva is residing in every being and serve them, and that is an appropriate spiritual discipline. And that was his motto for the Ramakrishna mission, serving Shiva as Shiva. So we have several big connections with the ideas of Shiva. So Ramakrishna is so universal that we can look at his Vaishnava aspects or his Shakta aspects or his Shaivite aspects or his Advaitic aspects, and he effortlessly blends them all together because he's experienced the ultimate reality and he knows how they all blend together. All right, we'll close with a chant, and just a reminder again, we will not be meeting next week, but tune in to the Shivaratri celebration. You're also welcome to try to come, but of course it does get crowded here and parking's difficult. But and it's a late night puja. It goes from 6 in the evening until the last, they're 4 watches, they're called, but they're basically pujas. And the last one ends around 12:45, and then the prasad is served. There's no homa fire on Shivaratri. This is a shortened schedule from the traditional. Traditionally, people would stay up all night and spread the watches out to take up the whole night. It's called the Night of Shiva. All right, and note the position of the moon if it's clear. I'll have a feeling it may be, we seem to have a lot of cloudy days, but you'll see just a bare crescent moon coming up in the wee hours of the morning if you stayed up all night. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.